Okay, we're going to bring back the Transportation Committee. And I think we have a quorum. The next item on the agenda is the statutory updates, transportation, highways matters, introduction of bill drafts. Does somebody want to run us through the bill draft?
Mr. Chairman, this is Director Reiner here.
Yes.
We do have multiple bills that are spun up, and we can certainly walk through them in any order you want, and maybe it can be the order in my book if you so wish.
Well, I have the first one as I do have the first is Department of Transportation statutory amendments. Is that what you have, Director Reiner?
Mr. Chairman, that is exactly correct.
So do you want to run us through the bill, or do we want Taylor or Ted Hewitt, or what would you like?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, on this first one, this is a multitude of different statute updates, and so it will vary. So what I'd like to do is to turn over the first section on which would update 24-1-106, which is on page 2 of the bill. Turn that one over to Mr. Mark Gillette, who is our chief engineer, and let him comment on that.
So I don't see, is Mark here? Yes, no, Kevin's there. Dennis is there.
So let's, Mark, you're up.
Okay.
So, actually, Mark is having technical difficulties. So he just came to my office. So, Mr. Chairman, let me sort of address the issue. And actually, let me just change seats here, and I'll let Mr. Gillette speak.
So do we have to call him Director Reiner?
You could call him Director Gillette.
Director Gillette.
I'll grab this out of your way.
You can call me anything. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name's Mark Gillette, and I'm the Chief Engineer with the Wyoming Department of Transportation. And this particular update is to try to correct an issue whereby some cities and towns have closed the highway for a special event and rerouted traffic around Main Street, our highway, so to speak. But when a large truck semi tries to take that detour route with parking on city streets and whatnot, they cannot get through, cannot make the turns, and kind of get jammed up, and then everything's jammed up. And so the issue is that there's no definition for readily accessible alternate route. And so what's happened is some communities think they have a readily accessible alternate route, when in fact it's not so. So we would like to add the language in red, so that when a city or town wants to close the highway for an event, the city or town shall consult with the department to determine whether a readily accessible route exists to safely detour highway traffic. If the department determines that no readily accessible alternate route exists, the city or town shall request department approval for the closure. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions.
Questions of Director Gillette? Representative Crank?
This is Mr. Gillette. So the last part of that paragraph is the one I have, but there is, the department is not obligated to approve any closures or whatnot. Can they cancel the event, or what goes on then?
Mr. Gillette.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I am not sure. I'd have to get back with you on whether we have the authority inside the city limits to tell the city that they cannot close the highway because they do not have an adequate, readily accessible alternate route. I would have to check into that.
Please do. Representative Blake?
Yeah, Mr. Gillette. So I wonder, when the shoe is on the other foot, like when they close down the tunnels at Green River, does the Department of Transportation consult with the town or city of Green River and tells them we're closing down the tunnels for a crash or whatever that might be? And if you've never been in Green River, when they shut the tunnels down and run traffic through Green River, you can't even drive in Green River. It's almost impossible. So I just wonder, do you consult with Green River when you close down the tunnels, or any other city or town when something like that occurs?
Director Gillette.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Blake, yes, we notify the town or the city if we're going to impact them, such as you described. We certainly understand that trying to run I-80 traffic down through the town of Green River, which is the logical detour when the tunnels are closed, that yes, we notify them and before we proceed.
Other questions for Chief Engineer Gillette? Seeing none. Do you want to do the next one, transfer of ownership? Or is that Mr. Rosetti?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, the next portion, I want you to leave me my myself. Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, if I could just go back to 24-1-106 for a second. I think what's so important, and as we talked, that this was really a discussion that Chief Engineer Shelby Carlson and I had, and she was the original bringer of this issue. And the issue really is that we as the state are responsible for the trafficability on state roads. And it is our responsibility to keep those open. And people, as they go from point A to point B in the state, transfer and go through small towns and big towns. And oftentimes the main street in a town is our road. And so if that road is shut down for a parade and they can push it to this alternate route, that's okay. But if the alternate route, it does not work, then what we're saying is, hey, you have to get a permit from us, because you cannot shut down interstate transfer commerce for X or Y event. And so it becomes sort of this mutual agreement between us as a state responsible for that state road and communities that put on events. The events in a community are very important to us. And we will work to issue the permit. And, for example, really what brought this to a head was an event, I believe, in Fremont County, where we said, hey, listen, we've got to really work together to make sure that we're successful in terms of where truck goes, because we had an event and the main street was shut down, and we just got a bottleneck with semis in the wrong places. And so what this does is this sets the condition for us to work better with our communities throughout the state to ensure that we support local events and to make sure that we maintain trafficability on our state highways. And that's the request for this statute update in this regard. Mr. Chairman, if there's no other questions, actually,
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering why the city would need to get a permit when it said you were just notifying them of things. They're not requiring you to get a permit. So couldn't they just notify you of that, and we could maybe keep the red tape to a minimum and just work through the Wyoming Association and municipalities rather than create another level of red tape for folks to jump through? Have you considered that? Just a question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Director Reiner.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Steinmetz, yeah, the issue for us is example for if you were in the hauling a load of beets, from town A to town B, and you got to go through, or town A to town C, and you got to go through town B, and there's no way through because the road is shut for a parade or for the sale, for a party or a barbecue, then we've shut down your ability to move in the state. And so there's a point of friction between communities wanting to have events, which is great, and we support that, and really the commerce that moves up and down our state highways. And so if we're going to shut down the street, we really need to know that in advance, and so that we can take appropriate detour signs or actually deny it depending on where it is. And so what this does is if there's a way to detour the traffic, then that's great. Detour the traffic. If there's not, then we've got to work through the issue. And what this helps us do is ameliorate that friction point.
Senator Steinmetz, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Well, thank you for that. And I completely understand that because I have a business on Main Street that events close our street and close our parking all the time and affect my business and commerce. And I completely understand and sympathize with that part. And yet I also want to honor local control. And so I think this is something that's going to require a lot of discussion and looking at. And I'm not prepared to make a decision on this today, but I think it's a lot more complex of a problem than just a little permitting issue. And so I just want to raise that and ask if you maybe have thought about that. And even in a broader sense, we might need to address it because it affects commerce in a lot of ways, not just traffic and through commerce, but people who are here having to live with those closures as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Director Reiner, do you want to go on to 31?
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to 31-2-104, transfer of ownership. And that one, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to turn over to Mr. Rossetti.
Mr. Rossetti.
Mr. Chairman, good afternoon. Taylor Rossetti, Support Services Administrator for WYDOT. I'm going to take you back a little bit to the May-June meeting that we had when we started talking about these statutes. And 31-2-104 actually was an area where we had conflict between this actual section and then the penalty section that's later in the code. And the discussion there and the changes that you see on lines 22, 23 on page 2, and then lines 1 and 2 moving over to page 3 really address those concerns. So essentially, when you're transferring ownership of the vehicle, if you knowingly leave incomplete information, it allows that to still remain a misdemeanor as it was stated. But knowingly falsifying information was actually a penalty as outlined in Chapter 4. And that's really what this language does, is it just basically says that if you knowingly do something to falsify that title, you are actually guilty of a felony as punishable in 31-4-102C.
Questions of Mr. Rossetti? Seeing none? Oh, yes, Representative Brown.
Just a quick one, Mr. Chairman. We all know how much the House loves felonies and trying to pass felonies. So I just want to make sure that this was the original intent and that we're just kind of fixing some statutory updates here. Is that correct, Taylor?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, yes, the wording in 31-4-102C, and that section is titled falsification, alterations, forgery, or counterfeiting, and the penalties was already in existence. So that was already established.
Perfect. Representative Blake, did you have something?
That answered my question, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So, no other
Mr.
questions?
Chairman, moving on then to 31-2-102 there, starting on line 4. The changes to this are actually sitting there on line 17 and 18. And this was the discussion about how when certain plates are lost or mutilated, they're a little harder to replace than just a standard plate. And what we're adding here is the new specialty plates that have been created since this statute was last addressed. So that's really all we're doing there. And then so for those license plates, if they're lost or mutilated and you want to replace them with the same number, it just would require you to pay that $30 fee again. So all we're doing is mirroring the newer plates with the existing plates and making sure that everything's all inclusive.
Questions for Mr. Rossetti on that? Please move on.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving then on to page 4, we're in the dealer licensing area, and the actual change for this is then here on license or page number 5. You see that on line number 5 there. And really what there is there's some conflicting language in the statutes as it relates to principal versus an established place of business. The belief here is that when the direct sale manufacturer's license was created, this was just a mess up essentially. And that it seems more appropriate that that particular type of licensee have a principal place of business. Which does have a different definition than an established place of business. So we're just trying to mirror that to put those folks on par with other automobile dealers.
Moving on, questions from the committee? Moving on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Then moving on through page 5, then on to page 6. This was the discussion about how over time when folks do like a remote RV sale up there in maybe your neck of the woods, or even does like a remote offsite type of dealer show, say down in the southwest corner of the state by Mr. Blake. I think they've had a couple of those in the last few years. There was some wording in here, and you see on line 6, the language that we're changing between lines 4 and 6 on page number 6. The statute currently reads that it's a $50 fee for the 2 temporary permits, which is right now actually appropriate. That's fine. The change we're asking for here is to actually just specify that the fee shall match whatever is in 31-3-102A5 or AV. And really what that does then is if that fee were to change, then this statute just automatically already updated. So that's just really an ease of use. So as they come in, if that fee for someone else were $75 and this thing wasn't changed, it would remain at 50. So we're just trying to make that so if that other statute changes, it remains on par with everyone else. Continuing on through that, then the changes on lines 8 through 12 actually just relate to the modernization of the temporary system. And many of you may have seen we're no longer using the green temp tags. It's gone to the actual computer system. That computer system was actually done mostly to prevent fraud, but also to update law enforcement in real time when vehicles are sold. One of the downsides of that is we no longer can sell those in units of 5 or 10 as we used to before. So right now they're a minimum order of 25 and the cost is more than $5 now. So the ask there is just basically the minimum order of temporary permits as set forth in the department rules and regulations. And the anticipated rule and regulation would just be that we would just ask for cost. So if the vendor's only allowing us to do them in groups of 25, that would just be what we would ask for in rules and regs. So again, it's not a money generating fee. It's just simply a recovering the cost fee. And that's the changes there on page 6, Mr. Chairman.
Questions from the committee? If not, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving then on into page 6, the commercial vehicle registration exemptions. The change here is actually over there on page 7, and that's on lines 6 and 7. And what we're asking for here, and when I spoke to you in May, I asked for the change on line 7 to be 3917306E. And actually, I believe Ms. Jarvis caught my mistake and actually correctly cites it here as 3917306F. So this is correct. And really what we're doing here is, if you look at that section and the section before it, it actually specifies that as written, the alternative fuels already had to either be part of IFTA or pay for the trip permits at the ports, but it was not included in this section. So all we're doing is, again, cleaning this up so there's no ambiguity in the law. So basically 106G there on line 6 is a gas powered commercial vehicle that has to stop. 206D is a diesel powered vehicle that would have to stop. And then the new one at 306F would actually be anything powered by an alternative fuel. So again, in practice, this is already going on, but there is the ability for somebody to read that statute and think that they are not obligated to pay that fee. And really all that is a simple cleanup, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Questions, Mr. Rossetti? Seeing none, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on then to lines 16 and 17 on page 7. This is kind of where we're starting to repeal some things, and I'll walk you through each one of those just to refresh your memories. 2614-105C, if you recall, we had a discussion between us and the Department of Insurance, and what this is a discount that insurance can offer, but it required it basically to be an in-person class. And it required our department to actually regulate that class. In working through that with the Department of Insurance, it seems best just to strike that language and let the insurer and the customer work out the methodology by which that's delivered and the extent to which a discount is offered. There didn't seem to be a lot of value to us as a department to weigh in on that. And it seemed like it was just maybe something that the Department of Insurance was not interested in regulating either. So we're simply striking that section, and that then becomes an issue between yourself and your insurer. If there's no questions there, then Mr. Chairman, 3116-101-AXXI was actually the definition in the vehicle dealers section that relates to an antique vehicle. And I'll take this one and 3116-101B kind of together, because really what we've got going on here is we no longer have a dealer license for an antique vehicle dealer. Any dealer can sell an antique vehicle. We don't have a specialized license for those folks. It was a cost prohibitive license. It was more expensive than any other license we offered, and we just weren't doing it. So in 3116, we're just repealing all of the language as it relates to antique vehicles and antique motor vehicle licenses and getting rid of that language. The other change there then that we have sitting in 3116 that we do think we need to get rid of is 3116-101B. And this was actually one that we talked about too, and it relates to those offsite sales. As it applies right now, all of those people are licensed dealers. In the past, they were not. And what this section allowed folks to do was to maybe not be part of some of the appropriate areas in law that are designed to protect both themselves, the manufacturers, as well as the consumers. So by getting rid of 31-16-101B, we're actually adding motorcycle dealers and RV dealers to the sections of law that help protect consumers from fraud and things like that, but also protect them and require manufacturers to treat them in a fair and just manner. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I believe that gets us to the effective date there on page 8, line 5, effective July 1, 2021.
So is there any questions of Mr. Rossetti on all the information he's covered, which is thousands of years of research?
Thank you, Chairman.
Seeing no questions. Does anybody want to amend any of this? We have public comment, Mary Beth.
Mr. Chairman, I do not believe so.
Okay, nobody signed up. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move the bill.
Representative Brown and Senator Pappas. Other conversations, anything about the bill, amendments on page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 8. Seeing none, Mary Beth, would you call the roll?
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote on 21 LSO
0011, working F5.
Sorry, my apologies, Mr. Chairman. This is a roll call vote on 21 LSO 11, version 5. Senator Anderson.
Aye.
Senator Hutchings.
Aye.
Senator Pappas.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz.
No.
Representative Blake.
Aye.
Representative Brown.
Aye.
Representative Crank.
Aye.
Representative McGuire.
Aye.
Representative Newsom.
Aye.
Was that an aye?
Yes, an aye.
Representative Obermueller.
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn.
Aye.
Representative Western.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Von Slater.
Aye. So that bill is passed too. We're on to the next on our agenda is antique motor vehicle definition, and we'll call on Representative Brown to detail this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a fairly quick process, and I won't waste a whole bunch of time with this. Many of you that have been on the committee for a while, Representative Laux, former Representative Laux, and I had this discussion 2 years ago, and he and I were working on it. And unfortunately, what we've run into is a couple of lobbying groups that are not a fan of arbitrarily changing the date of what an antique vehicle is. And so what we're looking at doing with this bill is trying to actually sit down and dictate what an antique vehicle is. And the reason being is we're starting to see quite a few of these antique vehicles putting these antique plates on and then driving around town with them. And it's not becoming, it's becoming a little bit more of a problem because this just says 25 years or older. Well, you know, I'm 33, so anything that was manufactured just a couple of years after I was born is now considered an antique vehicle. And I don't imagine too many of us on this committee would recognize that a 1988 Plymouth is probably considered an antique vehicle. And so what I have done here is, if you go into the meat of the bill, is really just on section 2, or I'm sorry, on section 1, on page 2, and we just have said a model year of 1979 or earlier. Now, I did a little bit of research back and forth. I tried finding some other states that have done this. There's only a few states that have actually changed to a actual date and time, and they have adjusted it. It is now up to a 1979. They had originally adjusted it. It started at a 1970 or earlier, and they're progressively moving it forward. And that was Arkansas, I believe. What we're really just trying to do here is just say anything in 1979 or earlier, because that's truly what I tend to believe would be an antique vehicle and then would qualify for this. One of the biggest issues that I have with the antique vehicle plates is they are a one-time registration. They are registered one time. I believe it's for $25. And if Taylor can correct me on that, I would appreciate it. But I believe it's a $25 registration fee. It's done one time. And once it's done that one time, they never have to re-register that vehicle. And there's no follow-up on it. That vehicle can just drive around the state, and there's absolutely nothing happening with it. So one of the largest groups did email everybody. I saw a copy of it, and I actually happen to be a member of that caucus, is SEMA. And SEMA has come out against this because they don't see the value of us arbitrarily cutting a date off. They want that 25 years. And there's some truth to that, because some Ford Mustangs in the late 80s even are considered, antiques and whatnot. But really what I'm trying to do is carry on something that Representative Laux and I had worked on a few different times. And he and I worked on this a little bit, and I wanted to just carry this forward. So with that, Mr. Chairman, if you look at everything else here, there is one other section here in section 2 that basically says if they have already got an antique plate, they are grandfathered in. If they do not have a grandfathered, or if they do not have an antique plate prior to this bill going into effect, once this bill goes into effect, anything after 1979 would need to be registered just like a normal vehicle. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
So Representative Brown, do they have, are you not allowed to drive your antique vehicle back and forth to work?
Mr. Chairman, you're not supposed to. It is supposed to be, and I don't have the statute in front of me. I apologize. I'm living out of some boxes right now, but you are not supposed to utilize the antique vehicle except for, I can't remember the statutory language, but it's for occasional use. And it looks like maybe Representative Blake may have it, but for occasional use, it is not to be meant for an everyday driver.
Representative Obermueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Brown, I'm sure you talked about just changing the years to like 40 years instead of 25 when you picked the 79. What was your discussion on that possibility? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, it was kind of arbitrary of 1979. The reason we didn't go back for 40 years and moving that forward, I would be happy with that. Really what it boiled down to is in a meeting, joint transportation meeting back up in Thermopolis, I believe it was 3 years ago, is where this conversation started. And we had some of the county clerks were concerned because they started seeing people coming in with a 1985 Mustang, putting the black plates on and just driving that around town. And the police and law enforcement were not enforcing anything because it's frankly probably not worth their time to enforce such a light-footed law, if you will. So I did not really think about going 40 years. I'd be okay with taking it from 25 to 40. I just figured that the way I look at it, most people would consider anything in the early 70s, late 70s still classic. Anything up and over 1980 is generally not considered a classic.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree that 25 years is probably short. My only problem with actually picking a date is that theoretically you would have to come back to statute and change it time and time and time again to keep it that way, or else we could go 20 more years and in a 1980 car then would not be an antique, but it would be 50, 60 years old. So I think rather than actually pick 79, I agree, let's just go 40 years or something, whatever the date, the length of time, and that way we don't have to revisit this all the time to bring it up to date.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Representative Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The statute reads, the vehicle is owned and operated solely for the purposes of organized antique car club activities, parades, exhibitions, tours, and other related activities, and will not be used for general transportation. And so I'm against this bill because, as Senator Pappas just said, are we going to revisit it in 20 years? Well, we won't. Probably none of us will be. Maybe Representative Brown will be, but or Representative Western, they might be there doing that. But are we going to change it every, like a 91 Prowler? That's an antique car, and I think it almost should have another class. I'm the license plate king, of course, but you have street rods, you have custom vehicles, you have antiques, so maybe just a collector car. But it sounds to me like if somebody's buying that to get around the system, then law enforcement needs to pull them over. And if you keep seeing that car driving up and down 16th Street in Cheyenne, they need to be pulled over and say, are you in a parade? Are you on a tour? And so definitely against this bill because today's cars might be next generation's antiques. Thank you.
Co-Chairman Eklund.
Mr. Chairman, I'm kind of down those same lines as Representative Blake just talked about. We kind of chase our tail on trying to pass laws and reinforce laws that will motorhomes. There's a classic example. We've worked that thing over, and I think nothing's changed. You still see Montana plates all through the state, out of state plates, and they just find ways of getting around it. I think the issue is for law enforcement. If you have somebody working for the state, driving to town every day with a black license plate on, I think it's time to just issue a citation and stop that. I don't know what the date is. I'd say 50 years. There's nothing cool about the cars in the 1970s. You have to go back to the 60s. Antique.
And I think you proved a point, Co-Chairman Eklund, that everybody has their own year inclusive. And I also think the 60s cars are really the best. But so any other comments? Yes, Representative Crank.
Yes, Representative Brown, when you and license plate King Laux were discussing this earlier, it seemed like some of the contention was you only renew this, you only have to pay this fee once. There's no renewal. Did you talk about maybe once every 5 years or some type of renewal so the state gets something?
Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman, no, we had never really discussed that. That was truly not really where we were going. Again, this was brought up by the clerks and the treasurers that there was a lot more vehicles just being registered, maybe not necessarily being driven, but a lot more vehicles being registered as antique vehicles. And what I'll say to answer your question directly is I think that's actually a good idea. And I would entertain the idea of putting that into this bill. But what we were really focusing on here originally was just trying to look back at this and go 25 years. There's a lot of cars that are only 25 years old that are still out there running now. The 69 Camaros and the 67 Shelbys and stuff like that. Those are the ones that these were originally meant for. And what was happening is the clerks started seeing an uptick in the amount of vehicles that were being registered. And I did ask Taylor Rossetti to get me some of the information, and he was gracious enough to get me that. If you give me just a second here, I thought I had it loaded up, but he might actually have it handy. He does. He's raising his hand, so he's going to bail me out here.
Mr. Rossetti, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown. Yeah, there is 5,590 of these vehicles total out there. So, the universe of things may not look real big. Based on the changes as proposed here, there's about 416 of those vehicles that wouldn't be eligible for these plates, but it is grandfathered in there in section 2. So those folks who've already done this wouldn't be impacted. It's a one-time $10 fee. And I think there's a couple of issues. One of them is obviously if those vehicles are being operated on the highway routinely, they're not paying for the registration that the rest of the public is paying for the wear and tear and utilization of the roadways. The bigger thing that occasionally will happen in communities though is that vehicles can't be parked on a roadway unless they're validly registered. The interesting thing is I don't know that by putting this plate on it, it would allow you to park them there. But again, it does potentially create a quandary for law enforcement. There might be significant merit in some of the discussion you guys have had about not highlighting a specific year, but maybe broadening it from 25 to a longer length of time. Ultimately, either way, as the department, we can certainly figure out how to administer this and would certainly be willing to do whatever the direction of the committee is.
Senator
Mr.
Pat.
Chairman, if I can follow up with that. Thank you, Taylor, first of all. And then secondly, what I would say is, I am not sold on the 1979 or earlier. This was a rough draft to bring to the committee and have for the committee's consideration. But what I will also say is the idea that cops have a ton of time on their hands to just be stopping black plates as they're driving around. I think all of our communities are facing budget cuts and crises right now, and all of our communities are facing the hardline ability to attract and retain law enforcement. And what I would say is I don't think our law enforcement is really focused on stopping black plated vehicles driving up and down the road. This is really on an honor system to begin with. And so I don't think that I really want to task our law enforcement telling people, hey, we're going to write you a ticket for not being properly licensed, when in fact they are right now. All they have to do is say, well, I was showing my car at the local McDonald's. That's good enough for the cop to say, oh, okay, well, I guess I shouldn't have pulled you over. And that's typically what happens, at least with the few officers that I've talked to about this. So again, I would entertain absolutely a 40-year, 35-year, 30-year, I don't care. I just do think that we should push this back. I think we have too many of these vehicles being registered and too many of these vehicles skating the system to not pay the registration fees.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Frankly, I would actually like to expand the whole system. Number one, if it's going to be a one-time fee, it ought to be a lot higher than $10. These people can afford that. But frankly, I think it ought to be a yearly fee. And along with that way we know these cars, even though they may not be driven on the road very often, they are driven on the road. And so they are required to have insurance. And so at least liability. But no one's going to be no one reviews that information if it's a one-time charge. And frankly, what I would like to see, my personal preference, probably not the preference of those people who have those plates right now, but and actually I have a 1931 Chevy that I need to get binder plates on one of these days when I get it running. But anyhow, if we had a low fee, $10 registration every year for a plate, required them to provide insurance information, and then let's let them drive it on the road. What is a problem? They're not going to drive it that often, but it is an antique car. We're acknowledging the fact that it's paid registration for 40 years or whatever. And so, okay, we're gonna charge you only $10, but we're gonna let you drive it on the road. We're not gonna let you only drive it to the car show. That's what I would like to see.
Mr. Chairman.
So Senator Anderson.
I appreciate Senator Pappas's discussion. I think there is some good ideas there, but it isn't relevant to this bill. this bill doesn't have any of that in it, any part of that. And I agree, we ought to make that an annual thing, but we gotta find the statute for that. That isn't in this statute.
So, Mary Beth, is there any other public?
Mr. Chairman, there is not.
Okay. Representative Brown?
Mr. Chairman, what I can say is this is a draft bill. This is not a bill coming before the committee, so we can actually amend in and out of here, and they can adjust the title as they see fit. So if there's, you know, ideological changes that we'd like to see to this bill, we can do that. This is still in its draft format and still not approved for introduction. So
Representative Brown, you did want the Transportation Committee to take this bill?
yes, Mr. Chairman, that would be my hopes.
Okay, Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, how about if we table this for this meeting and get some of those other changes that Senator Pappas is talking about and make it a little more comprehensive and get this fixed once and for all. I agree with Representative Eklund that 50 years would be a nice number. That dials it back to 71. I consider 70s and 80s vehicles still roadworthy. So there's some changes we can make to this thing. Thank you.
Co-Chair Eklund.
Yeah, I was going to say pretty much the same thing. If we went ahead and incorporated a bunch of the ideas that Senator Pappas had, I think they're good, valid ideas. And if we have people that are driving these things to work, then let's go ahead and set up a mechanism to collect road damage, a little bit of road damage and some kind of a registration fee, and let them drive them to work rather than making them criminals that get away with their crimes.
Any other questions, comments about this? Representative Blake?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's a good idea that we not have any time frame in there. Don't put it after 79 or earlier. I kind of like the idea of Senator Pappas, because when I go to license my 68 Toronado, it's about $36. I don't have a Pioneer plate on it or collector plate, because the value of the car, factory valuation, was $3,900, $4,500 in 1968. So it wouldn't be a huge leap for an old car to pay the regular license plate every year. So I don't know if we can fix this bill or not, but I'd be open to that plan, I guess.
Senator Pappas?
Just to the earlier comment about the date.
We have a second on the tabling. Senator Pappas, do we have a second on the tabling?
I'll second it.
Okay.
Mr.
Senator
Chairman,
Pappas,
even if
second.
you don't want to put it on the table, I'll pull it back myself, and we don't even have to consider it right now, and I'll work it and bring it back in November.
How about that, Senator Pappas?
Yeah, but to my point is the time frame. I agree we need a time frame. I think going from 25 years to 50 years is a big jump, though. I would prefer somewhere in the middle, maybe right around the 40 years that Representative Brown originally had by his 1979 date. I just think going 50 years is a little bit too far, based on we'll be putting a lot of people that are grandfathered in then. And so I just prefer to not be quite as long.
Okay.
Personally,
We're
sorry.
going to table this bill, or Representative Brown is pulling this bill, and he's going to run it up. In November, we'll bring it back, and we'll see if everybody agrees with that. So onward. On the agenda now is, I think we're going to do, is Director Reinhardt there? The state employee moving expenses, I see that.
Mr. Chairman, I am here, and we can certainly talk state employee moving expenses, Bill 21 LSO-0010 version .4.
Did we have this, Director Reinhardt, last time?
Mr. Chairman, this is a carryover from from this year's session. It failed the introduction with budget rules by about 1 or 2 votes.
Okay, please continue.
So as a reminder for this committee. So this is an item that the department brought to this committee last year. And the discussion really is, if you look at page 2, line 1, 2, and 3, that's crossed off. What's crossed off says, when the transfer is made at the request of and for the benefit of the state of Wyoming. So the issue for us has been that as you take it in the totality, has to do with the transfer of an employee around the state as you apply for and receive new jobs. And this has been interpreted as, if I'm applying for a job in Cheyenne and I currently work in Sheridan, that we are prohibited from helping pay the moving expenses. Now, if I, as a director, handpicked the employee in Sheridan and said, you are moving to Cheyenne, then we're authorized to pay the moving expenses. However, that is not how we select people for jobs in this day and age. We allow people to apply, and then we select, and then we say, come on down because we need you here. And so this is the way that the statute has been read, has restricted our ability to provide this relocation assistance. So you might say, well, hey, so what? And here's really the issue for us, is that we have a diverse workforce that's distributed throughout the state. And it is very important for us to develop our employees by putting them in positions of greater responsibility so that they can assume a mantle of responsibility and work for all of us in these different positions. And what we're discovering is, in this age of dual employment and less mobility for families, that the us not providing moving expenses is inhibiting the willingness of our employees to put in for a job, and because of the cost of moving, because of the disruption to the family, and probably the loss of a second income for a while. And so our request is that we modify this language so that if somebody applies for a job and is selected, that we assist them in moving. And so as we talked through that concept of the last time, that was, yep, we understand that issue. And then the discussion and this was obviously last interim, really centered around the amount of money that we would pay for the moving expense. And we kicked around a lot of different, there's a long discussion on, some of you said, hey, the director should decide. Others said, hey, let's set a limit. Some said 5,000, some said 10,000. In the end, what we settled on for the bill was that the rate would be set by HRD, by ANI HRD on an annual basis for an amount that would be applicable and fair for moving expenses. So with that as a background, then if you go to walk through the bill and you start on really on page 1, and what you talk about there on line 12, correction, on line 11, you cross off is transferred, and on line 12 you add transfers, and then the next change is on page 2, line 1, 2, and 3, and you can see what's crossed off is when the transfer is made at the request of and for the benefit of the state of Wyoming. And then the modification then is on line 7 and 8 in terms of when we pay it. And with the caveat there is when the transfer is made as a requirement of employment and for the benefit of the state of Wyoming. And to me, that is so key, because we are in the business of developing long-term employees for the state, and getting the right person in the right job at the right time, I see is key and essential. And in the end is a very wise use of our money. And then line 10 through 18 is the addition that has to do with how much should we pay. And really what it says is that you don't have to pay moving expenses, but that you may. And you may pay the amount not to exceed the amount allowed by the Department of A&I rules for the actual expense or a portion of the actual expense of transporting the household goods. And so that section there says, hey, you may pay it, director, if you have the resources and feel the position is important enough to do. And what you may pay is the rate that's set by A&I. And so that has been no change in this bill since the last time it was approved by this committee. And we do continue to see it as very important for the health of our agency. Now, does it help the employees? Yes, it does. But what for me as a director is so important is this business of having people walk through chairs of increasing responsibility. So in the end, we can grow chief engineers or assistant chief engineers or directors of agencies. And with that, Mr. Chairman.
Director Reiner, you lost your Director Reiner.
Let me stand.
I don't know what's happening there. Other people hear him?
I didn't lose him, so it might be.
We can hear him fine.
Okay.
With that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions.
All right, I have you back. I lost a little bit of it. My question would be on line 7 and 8, page 2, when the transfer is made as a requirement of employment, so you're getting a group of people that bid on a job and they have to come to Cheyenne and you're going to pay X dollars, is made as a requirement of employment. They could have stayed there and been employed, right?
The requirement, Mr. Chairman, the requirement of their new job is that they are in Cheyenne. The location of their new job requires that they move.
So it should say is made as a requirement of their new job or their new position or something, not a requirement of their employment.
Mr. Chairman, that would be, I would consider that an improvement in the language. The issue is, hey, we selected for you a new job. It's in a different location and we need you here.
Mr. Hewitt, do you have something?
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to agree with Director Reiner on that one.
On the employment aspect being, okay. Other comments from the committee? Yes, Representative Brown.
2 questions, Mr. Chairman. First and foremost, I've been an ardent fighter of this particular bill. I do not like this bill, but I want to make sure I'm understanding this. Originally, the first time we looked at this was underneath just WYDOT, the original very first time that we saw this, and then it got opened up to all state agencies. And so when I'm sitting here looking at the state agencies, I'm curious why this is being brought by WYDOT and not as an appropriations bill from A&I. So if I can get some information on that first and foremost.
Director Reiner.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Brown, I suspect the reason is because we employ between 20 and 25% of the state workforce. Certainly, my workforce is scattered throughout the state to the extent of no others. There are other agencies that have people across the state. We certainly have the most, and I perceived it an issue and brought the bill, and that's why it's from WYDOT.
Other comments? Representative Brown, do you have a second question?
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, I guess I would ask then, this has come up now, I believe 3 sessions now in a row, we've had this discussion, or maybe it's only 2. But I'm just curious, how many people are we affecting with this? I mean, it seems to me like we've really got this one employee that we really want to move down here, or we really want to move up to Jackson or something along those lines. It seems to me like we've got an employee, or two employees for that matter, that are just waiting for this bill to get passed so we can get them moved. And I'm really concerned about that. So I'm curious, how many employees are we looking at this affecting, and why the staunch, the legislature has spoke 2 times in a row. Why are we seeing this again?
Yeah.
Director Reiner.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, one is there are currently no employees waiting on this. We have moved on, and have filled positions as we've needed to, because you got to keep the process moving. Why are you so? But I would say, you know, it affects you probably and I don't have some exact numbers. My estimation would be between 10 and 20 a year. And it affects here's who it affects. It affects primarily our senior engineers, and it affects our highway patrol troopers. And so those are positions that you have to move to grow. And when you don't move because you see people homestead, it negatively affects the career development of those individuals. And that's what we have going on now is, in my mind, in the long run, we're doing a disservice to our state agencies in terms of preparing people for leadership positions. And that's why you're seeing it again. I probably didn't. So that's that issue. I firmly believe that we aren't doing what's right, and so in the long run, we are negatively impacting our agency, and that's why we brought it. I you know, as I read the statute, I think that the intent when it was written was for what we're now describing. And I think that our employment rules and our selection processes have changed, and the statute has not kept up with that.
Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Reiner, am I to understand that the agency, if they want to pay for moving expenses under this bill, has to find that money within their current budget? They can't ask for additional funds. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Newsom, that's correct. It's within existing resources.
Follow up, Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, this kind of common practice in the private sector. If you require somebody to move, you're going to pay moving expenses and all the probably staying in a motel and everything else kind of expenses if you really want them to move. Pretty typical of large corporations, of smaller outfits in Wyoming that do it all the time. The other thing about the career path thing is if the guy can't move because of those expenses, it jeopardizes his ability to move up the ladder, if you will, to take on promotions, but it also hinders the underlings that can't move up into that job also. You get a deadline job because the guy won't move. I'm all for this. I think we should do this. We should have been doing this all along. I have another issue on page 2, line 11. It says they may pay. I've been through a deal like that where one of my supervisors didn't pay for a move, and the employee held that grudge for 2 or 3 years till we found out about it, and it wasn't optional. We paid those things, and you get a supervisor that says, "I don't think I'll pay that guy because I don't like him that much." There should not be an option here to may pay. It should be shall pay. So I'll be offering a change for that. Thank you.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is directed to Director Reiner. On page 2 of the bill, on page 1 and 2 and 3, you have a strikeout on the transfers made at the request of and for the benefit of the state of Wyoming. If I believe I heard you correctly, that someone applies for a job and they get the job. To me, if you are applying for a job in another city in Wyoming, you're going to know you're going to have to move. And you should have made those arrangements or thought about, factor that in. Is this job going to be worthwhile to me to move at the expense of the state of Wyoming? Should we do that? That's question number 1. And number 2, not every agency will have the money to pay for moves. And number 3, we're not like a private industry. We are a state where taxpayers are giving money to the state for state functions, not particularly to help move an individual who's applied and received it. Is that correct?
Director Reiner?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Hutchins, let me take the 2 questions. You broke up a little bit on the first one, ma'am, but I think what I heard you say is, hey, if you apply for a job in another city, you should expect to pay the moving expenses to go. And that really is the crux of the issue, is that based on current pay and based on all of the issues of moving, that are talented people who need to move for the good of the agency, because we need them to grow in their responsibilities and to develop their skills, are not applying. And so that is the issue. And we want to encourage them to apply, and we need to help them to apply, because frankly, and I know you've heard it before, is at the current pay scales that we're paying sometimes do not facilitate the ability to easily move. To your point about we aren't a professional, we aren't a private organization, we're a state using taxpayers' money. I completely concur with you that if I'm a resident of the state of Wyoming, I would expect a professional, trained set of employees working for the state. And because everything we do affects the residents of the state in terms of policy, in terms of execution, in terms of decisions that we make. That's specifically true when you look at our trooper leadership in terms of law enforcement. It's specifically true when you look at all of the impact that my district engineers have in their separate districts. And so I would make the comment that I think it's our responsibility as state employees to ensure a professional workforce. And the way you do that, one of the ways you do that is through training, and it's through jobs of increasing responsibility.
Co-Chairman Eklund.
I'll try to be brief. I've been a supporter of this idea for quite a while. I'm surprised we can't do it without legislation. The state of Wyoming is known for developing our employees. We train them, we get them ready to go, and we've watched pretty much entire agencies go up in smoke with some bad leadership and then have to be rebuilt. And then we have to go to our state employees and tell them there'll be no job raises because we don't have the revenues to do that. We have to have some kind of benefit to keep them around. I think there are a lot of people that love Wyoming and would like to move up the ladder in the chain. But our personnel development is something that we do very well. And this is a tool that the director has brought to us. as far as us dealing with the issue before, we dealt with skilled nursing for years. It was due to the persistence of a few people that we finally just worked at it until we got that job done. I think, you know, a promise that probably each of us made at some point in time when we ran for this office to the people of Wyoming is that we would do what we thought was best for the state. And there are ways you can save a little bit of money, but there are ways you can destroy the state by saving money and removing services and removing opportunities for our state people. It just seems like a crazy way to run the state. We have very little benefit. I honestly can't recommend to anybody that they come and work for the state of Wyoming because we're short on money and we're just going to make cuts. We just aren't interested in giving them many benefits. Our state employees are taking, for most of them, are taking somewhat of a beating right now. This is a tool that the director could use and other agencies could use to keep their best employees around.
Further comments? Mary Beth, do we have anybody on the public who wants to speak on this?
Mr. Chairman, we do not.
Okay. Committee, what is your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Move the bill. Do I have a second? Second, O'Hairn. So I moved the bill in a second. Further comments? Amendments on page 1. Representative Blake.
Yeah, I have a comment, kind of goes in line with Chairman Eklund. We lose state employees all the time to surrounding states. We haven't given them a raise in quite a while. I'm going to vote for it. Thank you.
Further comments? Amendments on page 1. Amendments on page 2. Amendments on page 3. Seeing none. Are you ready to vote? Mary Beth, would you take the roll?
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote on 21 LSO 10 version 4. Senator Anderson.
Aye.
Senator Hutchings.
No.
Senator Pappas.
Aye.
Senator Simons.
No.
Representative Blake.
Aye.
Representative Brown.
No.
Representative Frank.
Aye.
Representative McGuire.
Aye.
Representative Newsom.
Aye.
Representative Obermuller.
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn.
Aye.
Representative Western.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Von Flater.
Aye. Pass the committee. So I need to make a little. And so next on our agenda is selected service updates via driver's license. So I assume that's Mr. Rossetti, and do I have anybody else? John Guyer? Guyer, is he there?
Mr. Chairman, I have just admitted him.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
perhaps I have this wrong. I believe there is another bill, 21 LSO 0009.
I'll have to look at that. What is that bill?
Transportation computer system funding.
You didn't get it in the email, it would have come in a packet.
Yeah, it is.
Mr. Chairman, it's online.
I got it in my packet.
Yeah, I did see that. Who wants to walk us through it while I look for it?
Mr. Chairman, I can run through it really briefly. Forgive me as I'm your substitute attorney today. If I don't get this perfect. This is 21 LSO 0009 working draft 0.6 transportation computer system funding. You can see in the bill title, provides funding for the replacement of a transportation computer system, creates an account. It increases license fees, registration fees. It specifies the distribution of those fees. And on page 2, you can see the creation of the Transportation Information System account. Earnings from the account are credited to the account. The funds within the account are continuously appropriated to the Department of Transportation. And there are various reporting requirements in subsection B of the draft. If you go on to page 3, down at the bottom, you'll see that 31.3.101 is opened up. This is registration fees. And on page 4 and 5, registration fees are increased by $5 each. And then that $5 increase is deposited in the account created in section 1 of the bill. And page 5, see the fee for each motorcycle driver's endorsement is amended. And down at the bottom, page 6, on to page 7, see fees are increased for driver's licenses and permits. And these are also increased by $5 each. On page 8, 9, similar increase of $5 per fee for commercial vehicles. That continues on through page 12. And again, those fees are deposited in the Transportation Information System account. And quick run down the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Comments from the committee? Mary Beth, do we have anybody on the public side?
Mr. Chairman, we do not.
Okay. Comments from the committee? Yes, Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there how much money is this going to raise? And how much money do we need to replace the RIS system?
Director Reiner, thought on this?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Newsom, let me see if Dennis Byrne is online and turn this over to him.
And Dennis is there. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee and Mr. Chairman. We anticipate that registration increase of $5 will generate approximately $6.4 million annually. And the increase to driver's license will increase revenues by about $840,000 annually, Mr. Chairman. So that would be a total of about $7.2 million-ish.
Are you speaking of, Mr. Burns, how much is this computer system going to cost?
In terms of the cost of the computer system, Mr. Chairman, I believe the committee over time has received a report that indicated that we believe that the system can be implemented for about $68 million on the low end. I would point out, Mr. Chairman, that information is a couple of years old, and that it may cost slightly more than that, and that Mr. Rossetti may have some additional numbers, but the number that we have been presenting and talking about for some time, Mr. Chairman, is about a total of $68 million.
So, Mr. Burns, are you talking 10 years at these rates?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. We believe that we could implement the system over the course of, a few years and then be allowed to pay for the system over the course of 10 years. There would be additional cost after the 10 years of implementation, Mr. Chairman, that would go towards, continued upgrades of the system itself. And I believe that the estimate for the ongoing cost beyond the 10 years is approximately $2.3 million annually. And again, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if Mr. Rossetti has any additional or updated numbers, but Mr. Chairman, that is what we know at this point.
So would these continue or at a lower rate for every year to get the 2.3 million in maintenance fees? Or would it end that day and you would take this off the roads or something to get the 2.3?
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at the bill for a sunset date.
They say on page 13, line 28, they say the section is repealed upon the certification required in. So that is one thing. And then that is the only place that it actually talks about it. And that's in a note from
Mr. Chairman, obviously there, the annual amount to maintain the system certainly could be taken into account at that time in terms of funding the ongoing maintenance. Obviously, that would be a policy decision for you folks to decide. If that was not continued, Mr. Chairman, then yes, we would have to take funding off the road for the continual maintenance of that system over time.
Senator Pappas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I recall our discussion about paying this off in 10 years, but I also recall, if I'm not mistaken, that we intentionally did not sunset this because after 10 years, we're likely going to be raising these rates anyhow, and so it would just be a smaller increase back then or in the future. If we ended up sunsetting them, then we'd have to jump up to a big increase just to get back up to, because inflation is going to hit us over the next 10 years. So I don't think we ought to be looking at any sunset of these funds. And I recall the $6.8 million a year as being cost, and probably it's a higher now as we just heard. So with the projections of 7, whatever it was, I think we're in the ballpark, and I think that's where we ought to stay.
Other comments from the committee? Yes, Co-Chairman Eklund.
The original system was purchased in the 80s and I'm thinking it was $400,000. And so it gives you an idea for the complete system that we're still using. Costs more than that quite a bit more than that to maintain it every year, I think. But the 6.8 $6.8 million annually just is the cost for these technical computer systems and whatnot has just gone up. So I don't see that we're going to be able to sunset it, or probably should, but could take a look at it again. Something I would say, we've tried to present this as a user fee, and I think it needs to remain that. I'm kind of looking through the committee and thinking of people. Nobody gets hammered much worse than I do. Certainly not on this committee, and most of my colleagues in agriculture kind of in the same boat. We have a lot of registered vehicles, but the cost of doing business, we seem to pay everybody else that needs payment for their services. And I guess maybe the state of Wyoming should receive the same consideration. I don't see that $5 is going to negatively impact anybody to put them out of business. So I'm in favor of doing this. I'm in favor of calling it a user fee if you prefer that over a increase in taxes. That's my choice of use of the terminology we should use. Is I want this service. I think all the people in the state of Wyoming want it. And so anyway, I think it's a fair, pretty fairly distributed amongst everybody. So,
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wondered if the department could go over the fee increases that we did in 2017, how much they increased at that time, how much money that raised, and then what this would take us up to from 2017 levels. Thank you.
Director Reiner or somebody else, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to, with respect, pass that to our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Byrne.
Well, I'd pass it off too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have the numbers in front of me currently, Mr. Chairman, on terms of the overall amount of money that was generated at that time. There was a significant increase in the registration fees and the driver's license fees, Mr. Chairman. And just as this committee knows, just as a reminder that those fees were increased at the time to offset general funds that were being replaced. The agency was no longer receiving general funds, and the idea was to replace general funds with a fee increase. In terms of the specifics that were raised, Mr. Chairman, we will get that information to you and give you a total revenue. In terms of the total revenue that we anticipate currently to receive in fiscal year 21 with regard to registration fees, it's about $86 million total. And Mr. Chairman, if I remember correctly, there was essentially almost a doubling of the fees. So it was roughly about $40 million. But again, I want to check. I want to get the accurate information to you folks. But in round numbers, Mr. Chairman, I believe those are the numbers that Senator Steinmetz was looking for.
Thank you. Further questions, Representative Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So can somebody give me some information about how much this offsets in conjunction with the RUC that we just approved yesterday? I guess I'm just getting to the point where I'm starting to see a lot of revenue streams looking specifically for WYDOT. While I recognize WYDOT is one of our largest, if not the largest agency, our state is really suffering right now across the board. And we have a lot of revenue enhancements coming out of this committee to support WYDOT as so far this far. How does this bill, in conjunction with the RUC, what kind of money are we looking at raising for WYDOT?
Approximately 190 million. That's my guess. Senator Dennis Burns. Mr. Byrne, do you know?
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned in just earlier, of course, this would generate approximately $7.2 million with regard to the RUC. Mr. Chairman, I believe, again, that has to do with whatever rates were set with regard to RUC. And I think that maybe the director would like to weigh in on terms of the overall amount of revenue that would need to be generated in these efforts.
So Mr. Burns deflecting the question to Director Reiner.
Mr. Chairman, and thank you there, Mr. Byrne. So, and Representative Brown, I tell you, so as you look at the package deal, the funding gap that we currently estimate is $135 million for WYDOT. Now, as we mentioned yesterday, that was a number that I inherited, and that we're researching with an outside consultant to tell us what it actually is. As we think about what's in that 135, there is some shortage in there for RIS. And so it's not lost on me that really a package deal of, hey, what are the needs and what are we comfortable funding is the question that I think is germane to this discussion. And so as you recall, yesterday at the end of the staff comment section in the RUC bill was a comment of, there are other ways to raise this money. Some of it would be increasing registration fees, increasing fuel tax, et cetera. And so it is a relevant question you ask about, hey, how much money is enough, and how much money are we willing to address? The issue with the RUC is it's a multi-year prospect, and as we discussed yesterday, that's at the quickest would be implemented in 22 and not finalized until 23. Certainly, if there is a pilot or a demonstration, it's beyond that. And so it's a long-term look at the funding issues for WYDOT. The bill in front of you is a short-term, is addressing a short-term issue of this computer system that we know is on its last legs. 40 years old, written in COBOL, can't find anybody to maintain it, had to move it. The state of Wyoming had to move it to Omaha, so this better taken care of. And so in my mind, this is a short-term issue that we need to deal with, and the RUC addresses the overall perspective of the agency in a longer term.
Thank you, Director Reiner. If I was sure that the RUC would pass, I would not vote for this, but I'm not sure that either. So I am ready to vote on this. Other comments from the committee? Seeing none, seeing public comments closed. What is your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Second.
I have a Anderson Overmuller. No, is it Blake? Or was it
It
over?
was me. It was me.
Overmuller in a second. Okay, further comments? Anybody have any? Representative Brown.
Chairman, thank you. I guess I'm going to be a broken record here again. I can't support this one either. We just raised these fees again 2 years ago, and I'll tell you the lashing that I received from my constituents on this as I went door to door 2 years ago was more than I really want to deal with. I recognize the plight of the RIS system here. This has been something that's been coming up for a very long time, and we've kicked the can down the road. But yeah, I agree with Chairman Eklund. $5, it's probably not going to make the break most people. The difference is it's just another tax. And out of this committee, we have now passed 2 taxes. Once this bill goes through, it'll be 2 taxes on the people of Wyoming at this point in time. I recognize the plight on the people of the state of Wyoming right now too. We're all in a serious situation. We're all trying to figure this stuff out. I cannot personally vote for this. I think we're sending the wrong message to people that we are just trying to raise revenue. We're not trying to look for efficiencies in government at this point. And while I recognize that this director has inherited a very large deficit, it's not enough for me to jump on the bandwagon to raise fees yet again to try to cover even more of a deficit. Thank you.
Other comments? Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to add on to what Representative Brown just spoke about, our private sector has taken a huge hit, and I don't think they're as worried about the RIS system, even though it does serve them and we have it in a safe place for now, as they are putting food on the table. You should have seen the food lines at the fairgrounds the other day. of people that are needing subsistence in that way. Our hospital districts are reaching out. They're having trouble funding, and some of their cuts are going to be to the elderly who receive care in home rather than going to nursing homes. All of these things are critical issues in our communities and around our dinner tables right now. We have business owners that have gone out of business. We have some that are still being affected by COVID, and $5 here and $5 there may not sound like much to us right now, but every committee is considering some of these things. And so it really adds up to our citizens back home, and also the tone that we're setting is really important. So I'm a no on this as well. And as we come into this hard session, I think it's really important that we take note of all of these things. Thank you.
Other comments from the committee? Sensing you're ready to vote. Mary Beth, Chairman Eklund.
Just what I would say, and I think all of us have to go back home and say to our constituents that we are going to remove services. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm not sure I want to go back home and say, well, we've decided we're not going to fix these roads anymore because we don't have the money for it. We're not going to fix these schools or these facilities or infrastructure that's necessary because we're just going to cut. And that's what we have to do. You better look at what you're going to cut at home. You better say what we develop water in cities and municipalities and irrigation districts, and all of those things have to have some kind of a cut in the scheme of things. And I've got to go back home and say, well, we saved you $5 on your car, but you're not going to get your irrigation system on. I just don't think I can do that. I think they prefer that they pay for some of the services that they receive. We were over $1 billion. I figure that it's closer to $1.7 billion with the cut that was two bienniums ago that we had, and it was just an awful lot of money. It's in a general fund that's $300-400 billion, or $3 or $4 billion. $1.5 billion is a lot of money. So we have to figure out a way of going back home and telling them we're not going to fund senior centers. We're not going to do the very things that were just mentioned because we don't have the money to do it. We're not going to be able to help people. So I think that there has to be a balance in the revenue generation as well as the tax cuts that we're going to have.
Representative Obermueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to vote for this. 40 years of one software is plenty. It also proves that there's never a good time to spend money on things like this that are the underpinning of our government here. When I sat on the Efficiency Commission, one of the things that they said to us was, yeah, you can be more efficient. There's all kinds of efficiencies out there, but you have to spend some money for those efficiencies before you can get there. And they looked across the board at our government, and our technology is way behind. And this is one of the worst possible cases of that COBOL system, which I was trained in back in the early 70s at the University of Wyoming. It's totally ridiculous. We get whipsawed by these arguments. When times are good, they say, what do you need money for? Times are good. When times are bad, they say, oh, well, we can't give you any money. When are we going to realize in the state that we have a vested interest in the employees of the state and their ability to do these jobs? We have nobody that can run this system anymore in the state of Wyoming because they've aged out. So the idea that somehow a taxpayer's interest is somehow not reflected in how we treat state employees is just wrong. So some of these things we have to move forward with, and this is one of those. And this is a proper reflection of the relationship between the taxpayer and the employee of the state of Wyoming. This should be a yes vote. Thank you.
Other comments from the committee? Seeing none. Are you ready for the vote? Representative Blake? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm trying. Yeah, this is a tough one for me. We just raised our license plate fees a few years ago. And so do we fund a computer system through license plate increases? We have a revenue issue in the entire state. So I'm probably going to be a no vote, but we need to figure out a revenue system for every agency. So each agency needs money. We're going to, and our license plates are extremely high compared to other states because our tax system is set up strange, weird. So I'm going to be a no vote on this because we just raised it $5. I hear from everybody, I got to go license my new car and it's going to cost me a lot of money. And that's why I drive around in old cars, Mr. Chairman. They cost less to license, I guess, but I'm going to be a no vote on this one.
And Representative Blake, I want to remind everybody that those are local taxes, that property taxes on your car. And the state only receives $15 or $20, depending on which vehicle you're driving. So, okay, other comments?
Representative Newsom.
Oh, Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the other thing that we need to consider, I'm a yes on this because if this system fails, which it may do, then we have to quickly set up something else with funding that we have no idea where it's going to come from, and we may not have it. So speed is expensive, whether it's cars or horses or replacing software. And I think we need to keep that in mind as we go forward, that this is a system that is bound to fail at some point in probably the near future. And if you remember that graphic that we had last year, I think it was, where the spider web of all the things that these information touches, it's not just YDOT, it's DFS, it's county clerks, it's a lot of people. A gal that I know went to work for DFS and she had to learn to navigate this system, and there's nothing intuitive about it. So there's an increased training time for the county clerk's offices, for DFS, for YDOT, having to do with this antiquated system. You know, when you have the flashing blue cursor that maybe half of us on this committee don't remember, that's a problem. It's a problem for training new employees, and it's a problem in terms of the age of this system and the inefficiency of this system. Thank you.
Representative Newsom and Representative Western, you both have this white background and you're fading into it. Representative Western is sitting up on his computer. Representative Newsom, though, she fades, and so I don't even see your hand up most of the time. If you could change that background, it'd be really appreciated. Yes, I can see that. Representative Western? Yes, all right. Other comments from the committee? Yeah, there you go. If not, we're ready to vote. Mary Beth.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote on 21 LSO 0009 version 6. Senator Anderson.
Aye.
Senator Hutchings.
No.
Senator Pappas.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz.
No.
Representative Blake.
No.
Representative Brown.
No.
Representative Crank.
No.
Representative McGuire.
Aye.
Representative Newsom.
Aye.
Representative Obermuller.
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn.
Aye.
Representative Western.
No.
Co-Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Bud Slater.
Aye. Mary Beth, was that 8-6?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that passed.
So that passed. Okay, on to the next bill. Do I have this correct, Ted? Yeah, are we doing the selective service?
Mr. Chairman, we are. Sorry, Ted.
Selective service, can you? There's John.
Good afternoon, Senator, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. I'm the Wyoming Director of the Selective Service System. I am a retired U.S. Army's Chief Warrant Officer 4 with over 27 years of active service. I'm very familiar with the military. I represent the Selective Service System. We are an independent agency within the executive branch of the federal government. And we only register the Selective Service System. We register men between the ages of 18 and they have to register between the ages of 18 and 26. And it is essential that they do that. And we maintain a system that when authorized by the president and Congress, we're able to rapidly provide personnel in a fair and equitable manner while maintaining an alternative service program.
Interrupt you for a second, John. Senator Anderson has a question.
Mr. Chairman, I had a question on that first line of his presentation. Is it still just men that are registered to the selective service? I thought we made a change to that and it was men and women. I thought the women wanted to be treated equally and were registered also, but according to this, they're not.
Mr. Acquire.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, the Supreme Court upheld the legality of men only in 1981. And as it's currently written in the Military Service Selective Service Act, it refers to males, persons, in stating who must register and who would be drafted. For women to be required to register for the selective service, that would require an amendment to the law, which has not been done yet. So registration in itself is limited to men only between the ages of 18 and 26. The selective service does not determine that. We react to what Congress approves.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Anderson.
I think in gender equality, we should both be on the selection. So that requires a federal law change, I guess, not anything we can do. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Acquire.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. That is correct. That isn't a role of the selective service. That requires a congressional action. So we provide that. We're not a part of the Department of Defense. We're responsible for the availability, while the Department of Defense is responsible for acceptability. So it does not, registration in itself does not register anyone for the draft. It primarily identifies the individual. It's been a long-standing obligation that our men between 18 and 26 register for selective service. I did when I was 18. I was drafted in 1966. And 27 years, 8 months later, I was up. So loved every bit of it. And although we appear in Wyoming, and I'm in the western region of selective service, and we pretty much, if you drew a line down the half of the United States, everything west is part of our region, and we're based out. Our headquarters is in Colorado, and we answer to Washington, D.C. My goal and our goal in Wyoming is to try and influence or allow and make it easier for individuals to register for selective service. We're a little low on this in Wyoming. We continue to lag the majority of the states, and I'm going to give you some more information a little later on in our presentation. What's really, really important is that we need to understand that when we have an individual and they have to register between 18 and 26, if they do that, that makes them eligible for federal employment. They can do federal employment, and some states even require registration for their state and local employment in some states. Also, it makes them eligible for federal and many, sometimes state student aid, loans, grants. And that's important when we're trying to get the individuals when they're trying to get that student financial aid, like things like Pell Grants, federal supplemental education opportunity programs, Stafford loans, direct Stafford loans, national direct student loans, and even college work study. And a lot of the federally funded job training programs. And one of the other elements, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services makes registration with Selective Service a condition for citizenship if the man arrived in the U.S. before their 26th birthday. So there's a number of elements that go in there, from jobs to financial aid to citizenship to federal job training. If an individual fails to register by the time they are 26, I'm saying males, they become ineligible for any of those federal benefits. I don't want to see any of our Wyoming men lose that eligibility for that benefit. So I'm going to go through quite a bit of information here. What happens though is sometimes if they don't, they sort of fall out of that mainstream and they're sort of, I don't want to say disadvantaged, but they're denied those eligible benefits. So what I like to do is go through some graphs to show you what we have available in that. So the first graph I'd like to show you is if Mary Beth, if you could load that first graph, please.
1 second.
I'm going to show you two things. I'm going to focus on the fiscal years, or the years, calendar years 2018 and 2019. And it's good to see that comparison there. I do believe I sent those in as a read ahead too. Correct. Let me see if I can move my scale. What you're seeing now is these are the 18-year-old registrations from 2019. The blue is those states that do not have driver's license registration. The orange, or yellow, if you will, are those that have driver's license registration. When an individual goes in and applies for a driver's license, they're eligible. They can select registration for that. And then the opt is in and out, they can do both. What I'd like you to focus on is that red. And the red is sort of the percentage. The Selective Service system is using a 90% goal of registration. If you look at Wyoming, we're at 63% of our goal on getting registered. We have 9 states above us, above that 90%. So we're in Region 3. So if you draw that line down between North Dakota, Minnesota, straight down, that's the Western Region 3. So we're only one of 5 states with Alaska who has not using driver's license registration. And it's sort of hurting our young men in the state. Next slide, please. The next slide is 18 to 25. The previous slide was only 18 to 25. We went up a little bit on that. If you look at, you're talking a larger group here, and I'll show you some more detailed numbers later on in this presentation. So the majority are over 90%. I'd like you to tell you, if you look at Texas, they're at 98% in that, and that's a great, and I'm going to tell you why I'm pointing that out later on. North Dakota just recently implemented driver's license registration in 2018, and they're modeling Texas. So we're still a little higher, but you're looking at a larger category, not just the 18-year-olds, but the 18 to 25. Next slide. The next one is our Wyoming registrations as compared to the US registrations as a whole. So, and you look, each category shows your 18 all the way up to 18 to 25. So, or 25 years old. So we're doing a little better. There's a couple years, a couple 25, 4 years old, 25-year-old we're getting up there, we're meeting that. But overall, we're sort of lagging behind the rest of the nation on that. If now we're going to focus a little more on Wyoming on the next slide. And this is the 18-year-old, again, 2019 18-year-old registration. And this is by county. And it breaks it down by those 18-year-olds where our registration rates are there. These are individuals who have registered. So by county, that's what it looks like there. It's kind of hard to get 2020's data because they got to pull all this data in from all over the nation and all over the state. So depending on which county you're in, you can get an idea of where we're at on that. So percentage-wise, some are up there pretty good. I do believe that Bighorn is 63%, not 630%, because you're going to see that in the next slide when you get to the shortages. So in the next slide, the previous slide was those who have registered. These are the ones where we're short, and these are by number. And again, that's by county. And so that's why I think Bighorns was 63% instead of the 34 number-wise. So still a shortage, still some areas where we can intend to do a little focus and a little more campaign on the registration for selective service. On the next slide, I'm looking at Wyoming versus 2018 versus 2019 registrations. So the blue is the 2018 and not the red orange is the 2019. There have been times when we've done well. We're staying pretty consistent with 18, 19, but we are using these same systems throughout the state, which does not involve driver's license registration. So overall, we've stayed fairly consistent on those through the years. The next slide, this is the 2018 18-year-olds. So, and that again, that's percentage. You'd have to go back to the previous slides of the 19 slides that show you what the percentage is in 19. But there isn't a lot of difference. They're fairly consistent. And pretty much the same thing on the next slide, you're seeing the 2018 18-year-old registrations. Now, and I hope Mary Beth is able to go to the next slide, and these are, okay, they are straight, great. This shows the 18-year-old registration rate differences between calendar year 18 and calendar year 19 on your left. And the orange right there in that center column is the differences. And the right side of the screen shows your 18 to 25-year-old. These are more number percentages. In Wyoming, we went from 18, 56.13 to 62.14 in 69.14 in calendar year 19. So 6.6% up, pretty good. But if we go back and look at 18 to 19, 18 to 25-year-olds, all of them, we actually sort of went down. We went from 80.45 to 78.49 on the number. So it's a little down in there. The next slide is a little bigger. It's sort of a two-part slide here, and it breaks it down as to how we compared with all of the states. And if you look at the 17 to 18, because we always like to look at those 2 years as a compare, we actually went down from 17 to 18, which is the same thing we did on the previous 18 to 19. And we also went down in the 18 to 25, although we went up in the 18 to 19. So we're getting some registrations. We have the individuals and males that are registering, but we could do better. And we are trying this. It's a little difficult in Wyoming. We have all of the available opportunities to register for selective service. It's easy to do online. It takes about 5 minutes. It does not take long at all. They used to do it in the schools. We don't, not if we're still able to get the information out. So we're still trying to do that. One of the things that we'd like to do, and I'd ask the committee to consider, and I do believe we have Administrator Rossetti on the call. We'd like to consider automatic registration through the selective service system. And that's all the slides I'll be using on that, except for the bill. We'll be going to that, and it's just a short deal. It's easier. It's less expensive to implement. It's an optional registration. It's much more effective. Not many ongoing costs. We're not aware of any ongoing cost. Again, North Dakota just implemented theirs, brought them up to date in 18. So what I've attached is a bill that would, a proposed bill that we could use to at least start the consideration process going for then maybe the next session. It offers an easy and constituent-friendly modification to the driver's license applications that allows them to improve their future by allowing for federal education and training dollars to flow into Wyoming. It will help ensure that the future draft, if there is ever one, and that would have to be approved by Congress, not the Selective Service. And if it's ever necessary, we want the young men in our lives to be subject to the most fair and equitable draft in our nation's history. Every man not registered increases a law-abiding registrant's chances of being drafted, should we ever reach that point. The proposed legislation, will automatically register men 18 to 25, required by law to register with the system, by adding a simple registration consent statement to the application for a driver's license or renewal. Some states are implementing even an identification card for those not applying for a driver's license, but this is something we could consider. And if so, we would probably have to make some adjustments to the legislation. This type of driver's license legislation is strongly supported by the last 4 presidential administrations, including the Trump administration. And so this is a very short thing. I have seen a copy of the North Dakota registration, and all it does is just add a small little statement to the application for the driver's license. And all that statement says is, by submitting this application, I am consenting to registration with the Selective Service System. If so, required by federal law. If under age 18, I understand that I will be registered as required by federal law when I attain age 18. So what we're asking for is some consideration to sort of get this in the forefront on our radar, so we can see if we can implement or change and allow the driver's license registration to also apply for selective service. If the individual does that, it's simply an upload from the WYDOT to our Illinois data processing for selective service. And that's pretty much as simple as it can be. I would welcome and entertain any questions you may have.
Questions from the committee? I'd like to see Mr. Rossetti speak on this, if he would.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Taylor Rossetti, Support Services Administrator for WYDOT. The presenter and I have discussed this a bit, and I think he's definitely correct in the way that he presents this is something that can be done. On behalf of the department, we did, after some discussions, actually enter into a data sharing agreement with the data center there in Illinois that was mentioned. So we're prepared on the data sharing end. But there are definitely some policy considerations here for the legislature. And I think a couple of them were touched on. Again, from my heart level, looking at what my duty is in my current position, is it's regulating the privilege to drive. If you go down the road of by not signing the application, they can't drive, that's just a policy consideration for the legislature. I don't have an opinion on it. I do believe that there was a provision or ability for opt-in which is a whole nother thing. Again, those are policy considerations for you guys to discuss. From a programming angle, you know, we did just have a long discussion about RIS. Obviously, modern systems are easier, but on a system like this, John mentioned this very well. It's really just an upload. It's data sharing. It's not a complex process, even in our current environment. We don't see much of a operating issue or administrative issue in moving down this road. I do think the other policy decision that was mentioned here is do we want to include this on ID cards? If we do that, we'd have to work this proposed language. But again, I think from our end, as we look at this, this is something that we can do as a department. It's a valid way to use the data. There's no concerns on that side. There's just a couple of policy questions I think we need to work out with you guys through these discussions, and then get a bill drafted up and put together. As we look at the options going forward, if we go down the road of an opt-in, that is slightly more difficult on programming, but if it's an all-in, so by signing the application, when you turn 18, you'll get registered. That's actually a simple process. You know, we can work through these issues. I appreciate the bringer bringing this the way he did. This was kind of what we instructed. You know, this is a difficult thing for me to have an opinion for or against, right? It's outside our scope as a driver's licensing entity, but it's certainly something that we can achieve if it's the will of the legislature.
So Mr. Rossetti, what you're saying is you could do this, and should they sign the opt-in, basically signing the form, you don't see that as being a very huge cost, and it shouldn't be, it wouldn't be a cost at all, actually. Is that true?
Mr. Chairman, if you go down the road that everyone signing that application would be enrolled upon their 18th birthday, that's from a programming perspective, the easiest way for us to administer it. What that would do is if you come in on your 15th birthday to get your learner's permit, your parents there with you, as you're reading that application, you're acknowledging that upon your 18th birthday, you'd be enrolled, and your parent witnesses that, and that's all good. That's the simplest way to do it. If you go down the road of an opt-in to where that person can select no thank you or whatever, that's a little bit more difficult for us to handle. But again, either option is available. That's a policy decision I think for you folks to make, not me or my folks at the counter at Driver Services.
So Mr. Rossetti, will it cost us anything? Either way.
Mr. Chairman, it's a nominal cost looking at the programming. When we did some initial look at this, it was between 25 and 50 hours. So not cost prohibitive at this point, sir.
Thank you. Comments from the committee? Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is for John, or three questions. What happens, or you mentioned the benefits of registering. You didn't mention any penalties for registering, or I didn't hear them. And then I was wondering if a young lad was interested in federal employment or any of those benefits, could they register at that time or at a later date? And then number three, I'm hearing, or at least the last time I was in the DMV, that young people, especially young men, not like those in the 60s and 70s, are really not interested in getting their licenses as early as those back in the day. That used to be a prized possession, and now it doesn't seem like it's such a big deal. Have you run across that?
Mr. Wire.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchins, that is excellent questions. Thank you very much for asking those. There is no penalty for registering at all, if I understood the question correct. But the other thing is, I mean, it's not a but. As far as when they go into college, they can go register at that time when they apply for it. But if they don't, that's where they they lose that eligibility for it. If they're applying for that financial aid at that time, they can register right then. That's one of the ways that they can do that. We've got a number of ways out there. Have I heard about the late registration? If they don't get a driver's license till later, until they register, they're not eligible for any of those benefits. So if they get later, and the risk is that what I don't want to see is our Wyoming young men lose that eligibility, because if they don't register till age 26, when they turn age 26, the penalty is they're not eligible for any of those benefits. They cannot come back later and apply for those and apply for selective service at that time. Once they hit 26, the registration eligibility is gone.
Other questions? Yes, Representative Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when I was a young man a long time ago, every time you walked in the post office, there were selective service signs everywhere. You need to register. I got a number to go to Vietnam, number 36, but the Vietnam War ended. And it was all over in our high school. So does the selective service still advertise or let kids know that they need to register, like in post offices or at schools? Thank you.
Mr. Dwyer.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blake, yes, they do. And I do remember those days. And I did go to the post office and get my little postcard and fill that out. And I did send it in. And they got me a year later. And that was the best thing that ever happened to me. But all of those opportunities are there. They're still there. We are just trying to add this as one more opportunity so that we don't have our individuals not get registered, and then by 26 they've lost out. Because as Senator Hutchins indicated, if they don't register, because they don't, sometimes, I think my son was one of them, he was like 4 or 5 years before he got his driver's license after he's eligible. So there are individuals who are waiting till later dates to do that, or maybe don't go to college and don't maybe get into one of those areas where they possibly didn't register, they didn't apply for financial aid. So that thing didn't happen. So there's a number of things. They didn't apply for a federal job. They didn't apply for federal job training. So they never had those, I don't want to say opportunities, they never hit that point where they needed to do that, where they had something reminding them that they needed to register for selective service. This is just another opportunity to those many things that you mentioned, the post office, the schools. I have a number of materials that I'll be sending out to the schools now that we're back in session, or at least most of that part back in session. So I hope that helps.
Representative O'Hairn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My son got a letter the day he turned 18. Isn't there a trigger that can make that happen for every Wyoming resident?
Mr. Dwyer.
Mr. Chairman, Representative O'Hairn, to my knowledge, those letters are still going out. Sometimes they're read, many times they're set aside and they don't fill them out right away and they forget about them. That opportunities are all still there. We're doing the best we can to try and get as much information out there as we can. The driver's license registration is just one more opportunity for the individual to apply for that, sir.
Other questions from the committee? Seeing none. So, Mr. Dwyer, you'd like to have a bill written in the LSO form of this enrolled act, right? Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I did submit a draft bill that I have sent around, and Mary Beth, if you're able to pull that up, that would be great. I know that was in the packet that was sent as a read ahead. It's a draft bill that we can tweak. It's just an initial draft. It would be something that we could start the consideration process. As Administrator Rossetti indicated that, and they've been very, very helpful on that. And you know, we can work through any of those. I know, as I said, North Dakota just did those. We used a lot of their information. They did those in 2018. they used a lot of the Texas. They reached out to Texas to assist with the wording on that. And Texas numbers are pretty high right now. We'd like to get up about that high. So we can make any I at least wanted to start this process because it doesn't appear to be a difficult thing to do, but I always know there's always some things that derail it, or some things that we need to tweak and adjust and determine what we would like to do. And I think that would probably be a good start is we could get that ball rolling, and we've got the draft in there, and hopefully get it back at your next meeting.
So, Mr. Acquire, we'll do a straw poll to see if we want it written in a way that LSO can write it up and we can consider it at our next meeting in November. So I need to show of hands those that want a bill written up that would make you could sign a form when you applied for your license, and that would make you eligible for selective service. So all those putting their hands up want that right now. 2, 4. Okay, it passes. So next time we'll consider this at our next meeting to do a bill that will have the selective service at the time of the license.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank you very much for your time, but I'll also acknowledge, I know there's a couple members on your committee there that are veterans, and I'd like to thank them also for their service. So thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate that.
Sir.
So we are on to abandoned vehicle titles and lien status. I think that's next. Wyoming Towing Recovery Professionals. Did you let Brianna Smith?
Mr. Chairman, I don't see her in the waiting room quite yet. I might have to reach out to her. We might think about a break.
Yeah, we'll do a break for 3:35. 3:35, we'll be back here. So could Co-Chairman Eklund, could you take this meeting for a few minutes?
Yes, sir, I will.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Okay. So the next item on our agenda is the abandoned vehicle. Wyoming Towing and Recovering Professionals. Mary Beth, do we have somebody that's going to present this material we have for us?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we do. We have Brianna Smith, and she is in the meeting.
Okay, welcome, Brianna. I'm looking for you. There you are. Well, welcome to our committee. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, and thanks for having me this afternoon. We had mentioned this issue in the session last February when we were before your committee, and we've been over it a number of times. Essentially, what a number of the towers are having issues with, and I should mention that I am the president of the Wyoming Towing and Recovery Professionals, which is the Towing and Recovery Association for Wyoming. We're having a number of issues. Essentially, I think what has happened is that there's about 3 different sets of lien statutes that can and do control under certain situations. And because we've got some abandoned vehicle statutes that seem to overlap with just a mechanics lien statute that overlap with some warehouseman lien statutes provisions, what we've run into is really nobody on the same page. The Wyoming Department of Transportation division that issues the storage and licensing facility has one protocol, one definition of abandoned vehicles. The abandoned vehicle statutes have more than one definition. We're finding that every single county, every single clerk in every single county is conducting lien sales in a different way. So what we're really ending up with is a number of issues with the abandoned vehicle statutes, towers bringing a number of vehicles in that don't fall under the abandoned vehicle statute, so that they're having a lot of issues getting rid of titling and getting rid of these vehicles. We've also discovered in the last year or so that a number of the lien holders or other people who have possessory interests in this vehicle, such as banks or lenders, have found some loopholes in the abandoned vehicle statutes that are allowing them to come and collect the vehicles for really virtually nothing. So like I said, it's a strange situation. It's a strange mixture of a combination of these lien statutes. And what we really need as the towers is either a set of statutes for getting rid of vehicles that are specific to towing, or we believe that we could take the series of lien statutes that are already in place with the mechanics and personal lien statutes, and just, even to a certain degree, something statutory that says that's the statutory lien provision that controls for towers specifically. There's so many scenarios in this industry that we really need something specific to this industry that controls for the towers.
Okay, committee, any questions? So this is something we've dealt with since I've been on the transportation committee. We've had, when you get a bunch of towers in the same room, it's like a group of ranchers and try to get them to agree on what the statutes should even say. They tend to all have their own opinion. And I'm sure you've been caught in the middle of a lot of that. Your ask of us would be to set up some kind of a uniform set of statutes concerning liens that we don't have?
No. So the issue is that between the county clerks in each county, law enforcement, and WYDOT, the Storage and Salvage Licensing Facility Division, that issues licenses for towing companies Between the three of them, they are all using different lien statutes, and they are all using different provisions in each of the lien statutes. So they're all using statutes that already exist. They're just, nobody is using one set of lien statutes and saying this is the set of statutes that controls for the towing. For example, the abandoned vehicles, really by definition, are vehicles that have been stickered by law enforcement as abandoned. They have their own set, the abandoned vehicle statute has its own process for getting titles on abandoned vehicles. WYDOT and the division that issues the storage and licensing licenses for towing companies says that any vehicle that is not abandoned or stickered by law enforcement, we should then be collecting under the mechanics lien or the possessory lien statutes, which are the statute section under 29-7-101. That section provides for two different methods of lien sales. That section has one method of lien sale that doesn't require advertising in a newspaper. And then it says there's another section that kicks you over to the warehouseman lien section, and we want you to use that lien sale process. So just in that scenario, we have three different sets of statutes that are being called into play. WYDOT wants us to use the provisions in 29-7-101, but then to use the lien sale process under the warehouseman's lien statute. So it's just very convoluted. It's very confusing. And I don't think for this particular topic, it's not the towers who are, we're in consensus and we're in agreement. What we found is that each county is applying this differently, and each county is applying the definitions in the statutes differently than the state of Wyoming is through WYDOT. And then you have this additional set of statutes out here for abandoned vehicles that people are also using because it's a little bit broad. So I think the statutes, in our position as the Towing Association, is that the statutes for 29-7-101, that set of lien statutes already says everything that it needs to say. It provides for a lien sale process for the towers where they don't have to advertise. It's a notice process, but not an advertisement process. And that advertisement becomes very expensive. So I think that we've already got a set of statutes that works very well for the towing industry. The problem is that when we go to each individual county or agency, they all have different kind of opinions of what statutes should control for towers. And so we're running into a number of discrepancies. We're running into a number of challenges getting the titles on the salvage vehicles. It's just, there's no uniform process for towers to do that.
Co-Chairman Eklund, can I take over?
Yes, sir.
So, Ms. Smith, would you like a separate towing lien statutes written for towers?
I don't think we need a separate set of statutes. What we would propose is that the statutes, the 29-7-101 through 29-7-106, I think that we just need something in those statutes or something that says, these are the statutes, this is the lien, this is the statutory process in the lien that will control for the towing, towing situation scenario. What we have with the abandoned vehicles is that what we're running into problems with is that there was this provision that you guys built in some time ago for $760 for a tow and a certain amount of storage during a day. That was designed, to my understanding, for towers to be able to go and collect on from the county on vehicles that were truly abandoned. And at that time, the definition of an abandoned vehicle was a vehicle that had been stickered by a law enforcement officer, to where the law enforcement officer had come by and said it was abandoned and stickered it. What we're running into is that we're having a difficult time, first of all, with law enforcement agencies being willing to sticker the vehicles anymore. And then if it's not stickered by a law enforcement agency, what's happening because of the way the abandoned vehicle statute reads is that a lender's coming in and saying, nobody claimed this vehicle for 30 days. So by definition, it's abandoned. So by definition, we should be able to pay the abandoned vehicle fee instead of the actual fee for towing. So it's part of our frustration is that the way the abandoned vehicle statutes have been used and construed by lenders is that if we just don't claim the vehicle, even though there's a possessory interest, and even though there's a possessory interest that wants it and can pay the bill, if we just wait 30 days and don't claim the vehicle, then we can call it abandoned and pick it up in an abandoned vehicle sale for $760.
Ms. Smith, you want a person's under 29.7.101, you want persons entitled to liens and towing companies. That's what you'd like on 29.7.101 to 106, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, so we understand that. What I need now is to hear from others on the other side of this, or others that agree with you, either way. But Mary Beth, is there anybody that in the public would like to speak to this?
Mr. Chairman, you do have whiteout folks in the room. I believe Lacey Bruckner, hopefully I didn't chop up her name. You have Taylor Rossetti, but yes, you do have Catherine Wilkinson. She would like to provide public comment as well.
Okay, either Catherine or Lacey first, and Senator Hutchings, you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to glean a good knowledge of what, let me see, where is she on the board? Ms. Smith is trying to say. So if she would allow me to ask her a few questions, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to do that before we move on.
Sure.
So if a vehicle is on the street and a tow company notices that they're for 40 days or something, and nobody ever stickers it, if you are asked to tow that vehicle, you take it to your lot, you charge somebody $760 plus storage. But if the vehicle is stickered, then you can take it and get the lien and or get the what is it? You can possibly sell it, or gosh, it's really confusing. Or you're saying the lien company can come to your lot, and if the vehicle isn't stickered, they can say, oh, it was just abandoned. We're gonna charge you, or we're gonna give you only money to store it, but not to tow it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, it is very confusing because there's a number of different scenarios. So I'll try and walk through it as best I can. So traditionally, an abandoned vehicle was one that was stickered by law enforcement as abandoned. It's abandoned for more than 30 days on somebody's property. It's been investigated by a law enforcement officer and deemed abandoned. These traditionally were vehicles that were maybe burned down and we couldn't identify VIN numbers. They're vehicles that were stolen and maybe didn't have VIN numbers on them. Essentially what they were the ones that you see on the side of the road, that there is no one, we cannot find a possessory interest for this vehicle. There's no one coming back to claim it. We don't have a VIN number, or some other something has happened to where we can't track down the owner of this vehicle. And what was set up in 2000 and 12 kind of through 15 was a fund for towers to be compensated for these vehicles, because we're seeing more and more and more of this, obviously. What the deal was back then was that counties were to take $1 from each title and put it in a compensation fund that, if provided the right paperwork is submitted and the right everything happens, the towers could be reimbursed from the county for picking up vehicles in the county when there was no one else for them to be able to collect from. And that fund is what set the county will not pay more than $600 or $760 and a certain amount of storage each day. So the original thought process was that towers that were doing these tows really for cleaning up the counties and keeping the highways and interstates clean would have some option to get paid so that they didn't get buried in vehicles that they can, you know what I mean? Then there is a lien sale process built into the abandoned vehicle process. Now, what we're finding with that, and I'll give you an example of the last one that we struggled with on this, was a semi truck in the middle of an intersection that the driver just bailed. He left it there in the middle of an intersection. So law enforcement calls the towing company, they come and get the vehicle. We're required then as towing companies to do a title search through WYDOT. Some of the issues that we've had with the title searches is, again, this abandoned vehicle language that says it has to be unclaimed for more than 30 days. And what some of the towers are running into is WYDOT's not willing to do a title search in less than 30 days. So some situations, we're already at this 30-day mark. By the time we can do a title search and find out who the other possessory interests are, like banks and lien holders, okay, or lenders. Then you send out the notification and say, we've got this vehicle, here's the tow bill. And then the lenders are coming back in and saying, well, our driver abandoned it. Our driver abandoned the vehicle. And it's been in your yard for 30 days, which means it's abandoned. So we should only have to pay the $760 that is in the statute, because according to, you know, a very broad and kind of loophole definition of that statute, it's been abandoned. But our frustration as towers is there is absolutely a possessory interest. There's someone who wants the vehicle. There's someone who could pay for it. This is not the kind of abandoned vehicle that, in my opinion, the statute was designed to compensate for. So that's been a loophole that's been frequently used by lenders, is saying, but we also meet the definition of the abandoned vehicle under the abandoned vehicle statute. And according to that statute, you can't charge us more than the $760, even though you've got a $40,000 semi truck sitting there that our driver just ditched in the middle of an intersection. The other scenario is, I mean, and that's played out in a number of ways. It's played out in DUIs, where the driver of the vehicle is arrested and taken away from the scene before the towing company gets there. So the driver may fall off the face of the planet. But once we do our title search, lo and behold, we find a lender or some other bank out there that has an interest. And by then they're saying, no, we fall under the abandoned vehicle statute because this has been more than 30 days, or the driver of the vehicle is the one who can't be located. So it's just been a pretty big snafu for towing companies. To complicate that, then we have these salvage and disposal licenses from WYDOT that each towing company is issued a license. And I put in my packet, the page from them, what they would like towers to use. Again, their definition, to my understanding with interviews and discussions with them, their definition of an abandoned vehicle is also a vehicle that's been stickered, right, by law enforcement, that really truly meets the definition of abandoned. They want us in any other circumstance, whether it's a call from the highway patrol, where you have these DUIs, where you have a scenario where there is a semi truck left in the situation, they then want us, in terms of liquidating or selling that vehicle to be compliant with their salvage and storage license, they want us to go under the mechanic lien statutes. And then the mechanic lien statutes kicks you over in part to the warehouseman lien statutes, but just the lien sale process of the warehouseman lien statutes. So then we have lenders coming in and saying, well, if you're using the warehouseman lien sale definition of the warehouseman's lien statute, then the warehouseman's lien statute applies. And we're not warehousemen, and that statute doesn't apply, but there was just an order in Gillette from a court where an attorney said he misinterpreted this because it's very confusing. And the decision was, no, the warehouseman's lien statute doesn't apply, so the mechanic's lien or the tower's lien was not priority. The lender got the vehicle back without paying the bill. So it's just very, it's not that the statutes don't say what they need to say, it's just that there's a number of different statutes and we don't have a clear idea of what statutes and what lien sale process controls. And then you have towers who are trying to go through the lien sale process in Laramie County, and that, you know, the Laramie County clerk has an entirely different process than Natrona County, and they have an entirely different process than Albany County. And so literally, I mean, I've literally been through every county in the state, and there is not a county in the state doing it the same way.
Senator Hutchings, does that answer your question?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. It more than answered it, and it made it more complex in a way. And it's like, ooh, yeah, we're gonna need a lot of help to help them. And thank you, Ms. Smith.
Thank you.
So we need to hear from Catherine Wilkinson, and then we'll hear from YDOT.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The issue that I was, Catherine Wilkinson with American Property Casualty Insurance Association, and I have no comment on the current topic. Would like to reserve some time to speak if another issue comes up, if possible.
Okay, thank you very much. Is Lacey Bruckner available? Lacey, I see your name there.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Lacey Bruckner, YDOT Compliance and Investigation. Our office is the compliance end of the storage and disposal facility licensing requirements that YDOT administers through our motor vehicle services program. And I have worked with the Towing Association and Ms. Smith on numerous occasions regarding these issues. When we are providing training or directives to the storage and disposal facility licensees, which towing companies fall under because they're charging storage for vehicles, we look at the vehicle and the situation of the vehicle as this. If it's truly an abandoned vehicle, meaning like Ms. Smith said, if it's been tagged or stickered by law enforcement, having been abandoned on public highways, it's abandoned, or if it's been left unattended on private property without consent of the property owner for more than 30 days, it's truly abandoned, and it would follow the abandoned vehicle process that's set out in Title 31, Chapter 13. If it's a situation where there was an accident on the highway and law enforcement requested that be towed through their rotation list or however, or like Ms. Smith had referenced a DUI arrest where the operator of the vehicle didn't intentionally abandon it, they were taken away and the vehicle was left on the road and had to be towed off. So that circumstance, an accident, or if it was just broken down and pulled to the side of the road, it would have to be removed from the highway because otherwise it would be a safety hazard. At that point, when if I did that and then I went to, I never came back to the towing company to pick up my car or pay my bill, then we would look at that as a storage lien, wherein you don't follow the abandoned vehicle process because initially it was not truly abandoned. There was an agreement between the towing company and law enforcement, or the towing company and the person who had the accident or whatever circumstance it was, to initially tow that for a fee. Then if the operator of the vehicle or the owner of the vehicle failed to come and pick that up, then it becomes a storage lien, and we would refer to Title 29, Chapter 7. And there is a provision in Title 29, Chapter 7, like Ms. Smith said, that does refer you to the warehouseman's lien process, specifically 34.1-7-210, I believe.
10B, I think.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, so that is the process that we as WYDOT have referred storage and disposal facility companies to in the event it's not a truly abandoned vehicle. A little history on that position that WYDOT has taken, if I may. In 2006, 2007, we worked with, at the time, the County Clerks Association in determining what processes to use, because this issue has been an issue for quite some time. Our licensees at the time were also having difficulty with the abandoned vehicle processes versus a lien sale and the limitations on the storage fees that are set out in the abandoned vehicle statutes. And with counties and how they process the abandoned vehicles and use their abandoned vehicle funds that are provided in Chapter 13. So we worked with the County Clerks Association, and at that time, there was a county clerk that was part of that association who was very familiar with these statutes, both on the side of a county clerk and also the business itself, because her family had a salvage business for quite some time. So she knew both ends of that. She worked with us very closely in developing these guidelines that Ms. Smith has provided in her handout. Apologize, I don't have the page. I believe it's page 20 of the handout. This information for storage and mechanic lien procedures is also the information that WYDOT recommends to the counties to use in situations where a vehicle is not truly abandoned, where it's been towed off as the result of an accident at the request of law enforcement, or a DUI request at the request of law enforcement. So this is what WYDOT has used for at least since 2006, 2007, when we worked with the County Clerks Association. So I do believe there are some issues with these, and it is very confusing. It took me honestly quite a while to wrap my head around it as well. And I had the advantage of being able to work with that particular clerk I was talking about earlier. There is some conflicting language also in the in Title 31, Chapter 13, with respect to repair, service, and towing situations. And so I certainly think that Ms. Smith has some good points here with this, and it would be very helpful probably for WYDOT. I can say for WYDOT in working with this directly that it would be very helpful for some clarification, and probably also for the counties, although I don't want to speak on their behalf.
So Ms. Bruckner, if a person gets hauled off for DUI, let's say, and he doesn't pay the bank because he owes money, makes his payments on his car, can the bank wait 30 days and call it an abandoned vehicle?
The way that WYDOT would look at this, I guess, or that we have looked at this in the past, is no, that was not an abandoned vehicle, that was a towed off through a storage, or towed off with an initial agreement between law enforcement that vehicle needed to be towed. There wasn't a verbal contract there. And so that would fall under the storage lien process. Through the storage lien process, there are similar notification requirements as there are with abandoned. So the towing company would still, the towing company would still be required to send a notice to the last known owner of record, the registered or titled owner of record, and any lien holders that might be on file, advising them they have the vehicle, identifying it, make, model, VIN, year, and indicating we have this vehicle, these are the fees due, this is the date and time of the public sale, you have this much time to claim the vehicle, pay the fees before it gets disposed of through the lien sale process. That would be our advice or our recommendation on how that particular situation should be handled.
So, Ms. Bruckner, you're saying if the bank just discovers after 60 or 90 days, the person hasn't made their monthly payments, and they find out it is sitting in a lot somewhere, they've just discovered an abandoned vehicle, haven't they?
How we have looked at that in the past, Mr. Chairman, would be that was actually a person, their client or their customer who applied for the loan through them, did not follow through with their agreement for that vehicle to be towed, and it would go through the storage and lien sale process, not abandoned. However, there is a section in 31-13-109 that also addresses this situation under the abandoned statute. So I think it's very confusing. We worked with the County Clerks Association several years ago on this topic to try to come up with a solution. That's what we would recommend if asked this by a county. But it might be a good opportunity to maybe have a working group, work with the towing association, work with the counties, maybe the lending institutions, some lending representatives, and maybe even insurance representatives to take a look at these and see what would work consistently throughout the state in each county and provide a resolution for all parties involved.
So, Ms. Bruckner, you're recommending a working group, like in to set aside what I'd like to do is clean up the statutes and not have, various areas you can go to, because, an attorney would pick on a certain area that would work best for him, and not dishing attorneys, but that's what they would do. So, Ms. Bruckner and Ms. Smith, would you want to work with LSO or to put together a cleanup of the statutes, as well as a working group to make the statutes work for the towing companies?
I would absolutely love to do that. And I think that would be ideal. And I really think that that's really kind of what everybody needs, because I think you hit it spot on in terms of attorneys have been kind of picking and choosing language that makes it work in all of these different scenarios in many different ways.
Ms. Bruckner, would you work with Ms. Smith?
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent idea, because it needs to be clear for us as well, so that we're not administering it wrong or causing any kind of hardship on any party that's involved in this type of a scenario.
So you have, I think it's November something we're meeting, November something. Co-Chairman Eklund, do you remember?
It is the tail end of November and the very first, like the 1st of December. So we catch both months. When you put this group together, make sure you've got the county clerks involved, all of them, because it sounds like there lies a problem. There isn't any consistency at that level, even though you two seem to have an idea of what you think the statutes should read. They don't, apparently. And I think I know the clerk you were talking about, and she's no longer around to help us, guide us through this thing. So may need all of the institutional knowledge you can find, because it sure has been a mess. We had a working group a few years ago. Bunky Laux was, Representative Laux was on that, and thought he got a lot cleared up, and a few other legislators were involved, and I think it was a big waste of time when I look at it today.
So, Ms. Bruckner, could you invite clerks, or would that be a possibility of getting the clerks there?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I think that we could do that. I will reach out to the president of the County Clerks Association and see if we can get a meeting, a Zoom meeting, or even a conference call or something, to where we can start an initial conversation with Ms. Smith and then maybe any other representatives of their association that she would like, to at least get the ball rolling, and then maybe bring in some other parties. I know I was a part of a interim study several years ago where addressing some of these statutes as well, and it involved lenders and the insurance commission, the trucking association. Ms. Furch was a part of that, and the dealers association. So I think it would be good to bring a group together like that, so that all parties involved would have some input, so that we can maybe get a solution that is consistent. But initially, I would definitely be able to reach out to the president of the County Clerks Association, so that we can at least get an initial meeting and see where their interests might lie in this.
And I would like you to come back with a bill, or to LSO with a bill that would align this up, so the towing companies would know that they have to follow A, B, C to get their titles, or get clear, or sell it to somebody else, or to have somebody pay the storage fees or something. So Ms. Smith, are you good with that?
I am, thank you. I think that would be great.
All right. So that's what we'll do. We'll have Lacey call the county clerks, and hopefully they come to the table, and Brianna Smith and Lacey Bruckner will be part of that working group. So thank you very much for bringing this to our attention. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any other comments from the committee? Not seeing any. Thank you, Ms. Smith. So that brings us to, on the agenda, committee directives. Is Mr. Hewitt there? Is Ted there?
I am, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so I do have make a selective service bill at some point to direct the YDOT to work with selective service.
Yep.
Statutes, what am I trying to do here? What was the last topic we had? Statutes for, oh, the Representative Brown was going to bring that back in some form or another.
Yeah, the antique vehicle
Yes.
legislation. Yep.
And what else did you have?
This last issue, the abandoned vehicle titles and lien issues. I'm not sure I have anything else from today. I can get together with Mr. Anderson to talk about the committee's actions from yesterday, and we'll work with Ms. Jarvis to get the minutes put together and create a full list of to-dos for the committee.
Does anybody have any comments on this? Yeah, Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, do we have any news on Heather? Is she feeling better?
I got my last, she was still out, but I don't know. Co-Chairman Eklund?
Yeah, so she's on the mend. Doctor's orders are to just kind of rest and recuperate. Other than that, I'm not sure she knows what the next step is, but they gave her some medications to deal with pain, and That's about all I can say, I think. But anyway, she should be back, hopefully be back to work. We missed her, but got through very well. It was just a good job on the staff's part, stepping up like you needed to.
And I think so. And Mary Beth and Ted, you guys did a great job. Other than that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
O'Hearn and Anderson, and we are
Wait,
adjourned.
wait,
Oh.
Mr. Chairman,
O'Hearn.
didn't
Yes.
Miss Wilkinson want to speak to us about something? I see she's not on anymore, but she wanted to talk about something.
I don't think she
Mr. Chairman,
about anything in particular.
I believe she wanted to address some comments in the handout from Brianna Smith regarding insurance, but that wasn't addressed at the meeting, so she reserved her comments for later.
Okay. We have a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? Second?
Second.
Okay, we are adjourned.
Adios.